Welcome back to Maturing Your GDPR Compliance Program. In this episode, we're focusing on security incidents and personal data breach management under the GDPR. Let's start with the importance of responding to personal data breaches in line with the requirements of the GDPR. Organizations which are covered by the GDPR are required to protect the personal data of EU individuals. Your role, either as a data controller or as a data processor, will determine what you need to do if you identify an incident involving the processing activity. As a data controller, a key component of your duties is the requirement to notify the relevant supervisory authority of a data breach within 72 hours of becoming aware of it, unless the breach is unlikely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals. For personal data breaches, where there is likelihood of high risk for individuals, you will also need to notify the individuals themselves. As a data processor experiencing personal data breach, your role is equally important. It is to notify your data controller of a personal data breach without undue delay, providing them information that will help them investigate what happened and also to assess the levels of risk to the individuals involved. This will allow the controller to, if needed, fulfill their notification duties to the regulators and the impacted individuals. This tight timeframe is underscoring the importance of having an effective response plan in place. Failure to comply can result in significant fines, but beyond the financial implications, there is a trust cost. Customers trust you with their data, and mishandling that trust can damage your reputation irreparably. Lost trust in your business has associated costs of lost deals and decrease in company value. Now, it's crucial to understand the difference between a security incident and a personal data breach. A security incident is any event that affects the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information assets. This could range from a malware attack to unauthorized access to a system. Not all security incidents result in a personal data breach, but all personal data breaches are the result of a security incident. A personal data breach specifically refers to the unauthorized access, disclosure, or loss of personal data. This distinction is important because the GDPR's notification requirements are triggered by personal data breaches, not by all security incidents. We highly recommend that you clarify with your security teams the types of incidents that they handle, as well as the subset of incidents that have elements of GDPR compliance attached to them. From there, you can clarify what extra steps are necessary in the process of handling GDPR personal data incidents and breaches. This 6-step approach can be a useful guide for developing your incident response processes. Prepare, investigate, assess, remediate, notify, and implement lessons learned. First, prepare. Preparation is about establishing and maintaining an incident response plan, training your team, and conducting regular simulations. This ensures that when an incident occurs, your team already knows exactly what to do, whom to contact, and how to minimize the impact. Ensure that during these preparations, you discuss, confirm, and document things like who owns the GDPR breach investigation, which people are responsible for supporting the investigation from each business function, such as legal, PR, IT, security, privacy, BPO, etc. Everyone should understand which workflows apply based on the types of incidents and their severity. You should also be aligned across business functions on the definitions of personal data breach versus security incident. Finally, you need to be prepared for contingencies for when incident occurs on the weekend or outside of your working hours, or when some of the dedicated incident responders are out of office. Next, investigate. Once an incident is detected, swiftly gather all relevant information. Determine what happened, how it happened, and which systems or data were actually affected. This step is crucial for understanding the scope and impact of the incident. Each incident is going to be unique and the investigation questions will be specific to it. However, the key questions always persist. What were the personal data that were involved? In context of which processing activity did this happen? Are we a controller or a processor for this activity? Which are the vendors or the customers that are involved in this? What specific personal data elements are impacted per each asset? Is the incident mitigated? If so, how is it mitigated? In cases of unauthorized access or changes to personal data, are the logs available to help us determine and to validate the details? Please be mindful that across all stages of the breach management, you are generating evidence for potential later audits, investigations, or disputes. As such, you need to be careful about retaining the logs and documenting your decisions and process throughout. Where you're deviating from your standard incident management processes and policies, you need to make sure to document the reasoning for why you're doing that so you can keep a good, clean audit trail. Then, assess. Once you have gathered and double-checked the factual validity of the information about the incident, you can evaluate and determine your next steps and obligations in the context of the GDPR. This involves evaluating the severity of the incident and the risk to individuals' rights and freedoms. Not every incident will require notification, but this assessment must be very thorough and documented as it will inform your next steps. If you have appointed a DPO, they should be consulted in cases where you've identified personal data breach. They can be helpful to determine the severity of the breach from the GDPR perspective. Most importantly, though, the DPO can be the critical, independent voice in your organization, representing the individuals and their interests, helping the organization do the right thing, like notifying, even when the alternatives are short-term cheaper and easier for the business. If you are a data controller for the incident, it is also typically at this stage where you're able to establish that a personal data breach occurred and where your 72-hour clock starts ticking. The fourth step is to remediate. Contain the incident to prevent further unauthorized access or loss, and then eradicate the cause to prevent a reoccurrence. This might involve patching software or changing passwords or isolating affected systems. On the most immediate level, the remediation step should occur as soon as possible within the incident investigation. Your goal there is to stop the bleeding as soon as possible. Oftentimes, we need to rely on security, IT, or external teams to help ensure this step. The remediation step is important to ensure that the repair is fully completed, for example, that the passwords were all changed for impacted individuals, or that the software patch was indeed deployed across all of the impacted environments. Moreover, the remediation step is a good chance to discuss whether there are ways to fully recover the lost personal data or to determine the criteria for when you are confident that a system that was put offline can, after stopping the bleeding, be brought back online without risking a perpetuated data breach. Fifth, notify. As a controller, you will not always meet the threshold for notifications, so it is entirely possible that majority of your identified personal data incidents will skip this stage. Either way, you need to ensure that you have solid documentation for your decision to notify or not to. If the breach poses a risk to individuals, you need to notify the relevant EU Data Protection Authority within 72 hours of determining the personal data breach. In cases where there is a high risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals, you may also need to inform the affected individuals directly. The GDPR recognizes that controllers will not always have all the necessary information about the personal data breach within the 72-hour window of becoming aware of it. That's where you can actually notify in phases. So you can provide the initial known details about the breach within the 72-hour window, and then you can actually provide a follow-up information about the breach as the investigation progresses. The regulator can also help you determine the best strategy for notifying the impacted individuals. Nonetheless, notifying the regulator shouldn't serve as an excuse for not notifying the individuals where it is actually required. For example, if there is an immediate risk to the individuals, for instance, in terms of identity theft, you will need to notify the individuals without undue delay. The question of where to notify can be quite challenging, especially in cases of cross-border breach. If you have determined your main establishment in the EU, you should be able to notify your lead supervisory authority, or DPA, in that single member state. But if you are in doubt, you should be notifying the DPA in the country where the breach occurred as well. Don't forget to indicate in your notification to the regulator all the countries which are impacted by the breach and all the other regulators that you're notifying about it. When notifying your DPA or the impacted individuals, at minimum, you should describe the nature of the personal data breach, including also, where possible, the categories and the approximate number of the data subjects concerned, as well as the categories and approximate number of personal data records concerned. You should also communicate the name and contact details of the data protection officer or other contact point where more information can be obtained. Finally, you should also describe the likely consequences of the personal data breach, as well as the measures taken or proposed to be taken by the controller to address the personal data breach, including, where appropriate, the measures to mitigate its possible adverse effects. When contacting the impacted individuals, you should aim for direct contact, such as email, text message, DM, whenever possible. Orchestrating effective and meaningful notification can be very resource demanding. You need to ensure that in your preparations for incident, you take this into account and have, for example, a crisis communication agency, which is available to support you when you need it. Lastly, implement lessons learned. You need to review the incident to identify what went wrong and why. In many cases, a root cause analysis is very helpful to capture the underlying causes, and it's often actually required by controllers or auditors as part of the documentation and evidence about the incident. Make sure to host a debrief with your incident response team, including all the business functions that were involved in managing the incident. It's best to take notes on which parts of the process actually worked, which ones didn't, focus on what can be clarified and improved in your documentation. Past incidents also make excellent tabletop exercise material. Make sure to associate the incident with the impact sub-processes, assets, and processing activities. This can help you visualize that particular activities or vendors are actually riskier and might demand extra attention from your privacy team. Fulfilling proper incident response adds significant business value to your data privacy program because it demonstrates to customers, partners, and regulators that you take data protection seriously. This helps to enhance your reputation, minimize potential financial losses from breaches and fines, and it gives you a competitive advantage. Managing security incidents and personal data breaches effectively is a major piece of GDPR compliance. It requires preparation, swift action, as well as clear and comprehensive communication within the culture of continuous improvement. By following the steps outlined today, prepare, investigate, assess, remediate, notify, and implement lessons learned, you will not only meet your legal obligations under the GDPR, but you will also strengthen your organization's data privacy posture, and you will add value to your business. Thank you for joining me for this deeper look into incident response management. Stay tuned for more insights on maturing your GDPR compliance program.